This is Morgan Kriesel reporting for newsjunkie.net. I'm here with Dillon Bergin of Muckrock and the Data Liberation Project. How you doing, Dillon?
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I wanted to start with your career a little bit. How did you get involved with Muckrock?
I remember first using Muckrock as a local reporter. I was a Report for America course member in New Mexico with an organization called Searchlight New Mexico. And I remember filing some of my first public records requests, IPRAs, as they call them in New Mexico, the state records law. I had questions about the language I should use or who I should file to, and stumbled upon Muckrock and started using the Muckrock repository of all requests that other users have filed to shape my request. I was reporting on evictions and I wanted to know how to file some requests related to evictions. I typed in the word eviction in the Muckrock search bar and I was like, oh my gosh, I can see what people have filed in different states and copy their requests. I didn't have a Muckrock account at that time, so I was copying and pasting and throwing them in my own email. That's what all those public requests on Muckrock are there for. That's how I first engaged with Muckrock or knew of it.
You didn't use the automatic filer, you were using the examples?
Eventually, I did ask my editor, get someone to pay for an account, or maybe I even paid for it myself to start filing requests through Muckrock because I was like, oh, if this part of it is that much use to me, then the other part of it will probably be useful for me as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I have the repository up on our site as a tool for people to use. I haven't tried to use it yet because I don't usually deal directly with those kinds of records. That's cool. I don't like putting stuff up there that's not free. So I was like, I don't want to do the filer, but the repository sounds cool. So that's good to know that it can be used in the field like that.
That part is free. The part that costs, actually filing requests through Muckrock, the reason it costs is we have a support staff that helps you through the requests at different points.
Gotcha.
So if you're filing to the smallest county clerk in West Virginia and they want you to file the request, sending snail mail an actual form to them and they'll send you back a USB drive, our support staff will help send that mail. Then that'll get sent to an office, and our support staff will sort your mail and make sure it's uploaded into your Muckrock account, and then you'll get it. So they really help with bigger questions, like questions of should I appeal this request, or the agency is saying that I can't file this request because I'm not a citizen of the state and I don't have an ID of Tennessee, for example. And so they help with all those sorts of things, but a lot with the logistical sides of filing the requests.
More involved guidance, so you're paying for the team's time.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And then how did you become a part of the Muckrock team?
So I started working on a grant-funded project that was partially funded by and supported by Muckrock at the time called Documenting COVID-19. That eventually grew into the editorial team at Muckrock. I was working on a contract basis with them. I had left the job in New Mexico. In a year and a half into that project, they were like, this is working well, and we want to take this team and make it a part of Muckrock. So they were hiring for a data reporter, and I applied and took that position.
So you helped shaped the editorial team.
There were maybe different iterations before me, but at that point, they were kind of rebuilding it, I guess.
Okay, gotcha. That's cool. Yeah, I was looking into that report, the COVID investigation. I was looking into your thing on datajournalism.com about the Uncounted investigation that was part of a larger series.
Uncounted was a part of documenting COVID-19. Documenting COVID-19 was a project that aimed to collect documents about the pandemic as it was happening. Uncounted was one series, one part of those investigations, but documenting COVID-19 in general, the goal was to do that, produce our own investigations, and also make public documents that would be useful to other newsrooms across the country.
The Uncounted one was super interesting to me. I wanted to ask you about that because like it just seems to fit really well with my project and what I'm trying to do with continuing research when resources like federal resources mostly, but also things like public support have been taken away, dismantled, what people can do to still move research and public knowledge forward. You were talking about this report on datajournalism.com, more of the behind the scenes of here's how you collaborated with a research team at a university. It was Boston University, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that those two, the academic side and the journalism side, made a report possible that kind of wouldn't have been otherwise, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think at Muckrock, we as an organization believe in collaboration above almost anything else. And I definitely, as a journalist myself, do believe that personally. And when I was in New Mexico, I was working on a lot of stories alone and just getting as far as I could, bring into my editor, going through a draft. Doing that traditional process. Investigative journalism takes a long time and is kind of lonely work. Part of the reason I was really excited for the Muckrock job when I applied was it was about collaboration. I think the team sport aspect of the work that I'm able to do and that we try to do is so much fun to me and so important. You'll see in our fundraising materials now, partially because I keep saying it and then everyone keeps saying it. We all keep saying, oh, it's a team sport. So Muckrock's tagline right now is transparency is a team sport. I think that's really true. The work that we did on Uncounted really wouldn't have been possible without the type of research that the team of demographers at BU were doing. And then they wouldn't have been able to take the big picture modeling and trends that they were seeing and actually understand what's happening on the ground. What is the source of these numbers we're seeing? What kind of human decisions are being made that are causing these numbers without reporters who would go ask coroners how they were certifying death certificates. It's really about passing the baton in terms of transparency or public accountability. And that's something we really believe in, and I personally believe in.
I like that tagline. You were filling in the why for the researchers, like this is what we're seeing, and then you guys went in and were like, well, why is that happening?
Yeah, the why and the how. The why may have been in that investigation, like why were coroners making those decisions, deciding not to certify things as COVID that showed all of the signs and symptoms of COVID and the person had a positive test for COVID. The how is that able to happen, and the process behind that as well, because I think that part for this investigation was important too, that someone was able to just decide they weren't going to label anything as a COVID death, and we had a coroner who told us that, and he was later charged for falsifying death certificates. How this is possible in the kind of patchwork death investigation system that we have in the United States. The cool part is that the nitty-gritty details of that came through in this modeling that the academic team was doing. They were looking at the difference between normal deaths, the anticipated amount of deaths for certain categories of deaths in a given year, and then the amount that were happening versus the amount of COVID deaths that were happening. And they were seeing these signs that there's a gap between those two, and the gap between those two is likely things that were COVID, but were not certified as COVID, because now we're seeing a lot more deaths of different cardiac issues, a really odd amount of deaths from different cardiac issues in a place where there was really intense waves of the pandemic. And so like during those time periods, is it possible that all these people were just dying of different cardiac arrests more than ever? Or are those COVID deaths that weren't being certified as such because the death investigator decided they weren't going to certify COVID deaths or write
Right. And
COVID on the death certificate?
like, why were they doing that? Why would you want to put a cardiac arrest instead of COVID?
That's a good question. I think the thing that I heard more often than not, at least from a couple death investigators, was the family told them not to, or they maybe on their own personal beliefs decided that people weren't dying from COVID and decided not to do that or not to
Interesting.
write them a death certificate.
As like a political kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah, I
Wow.
think so.
Man. Okay. And you kind of talked about how newsrooms and investigators became involved that were connected to these local scenes. Were the hows and the whys changing based on the community that was reporting it?
Yeah, definitely. And now I have to jog my memory a little bit because Mississippi, one of the places we were reporting, was very different than Missouri. The different waves of the pandemic and how they played out there were different. So I think it was essential to have reporters on the ground who knew what it was like to live through that wave of the pandemic and who the coroner was, how the local political systems worked, and have a better understanding of the context of the numbers we were seeing.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting because you've got this kind of national level statistical model from the university, right? So they're pointing you guys at the story, and then the breakdown further and further, the more local it gets, and the kind of also like the scale from academic investigation to journalistic investigation, which can be very personable and not, it's just not the same as a scientific academic thing. I think all of those working together is really interesting. And you talked about too how normally in an academic journalistic collaboration, it's pretty one-sided. Like the expert is, we interview the expert and they get publicity, but that's pretty much all they get from us. but the way you guys were contributing to the knowledge being generated, I think is really cool and interesting and a really good example of how research that's been affected, had government funding taken away, can maybe look for support from journalists, from other investigators, and from local scenes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I remember lots of conversations we had with the academic team at BU about they wanted to know what was going on too. They needed to know for their research because
Mm,
that would give their research more relevance and more practical significance to be able to say, this modeling, we have ideas about what is happening at the most local level of the numbers that we're seeing. I think that part is really important to be able to contribute to that. I think you're right. For researchers in an academic context, I think journalists can often be a way of passing the baton into a different perspective and a different way of approaching an issue and trying to understand it. I often think I had this conversation with the team. A lot of their work was meant to be as comprehensive as possible. And a lot of journalism is meant to be illustrative. So you can find a balance because we're trying to illustrate what this looks like from a human perspective and maybe not rely as much on the modeling, especially as a data journalist, than an academic team that is trying to be as comprehensive as possible. Their model will be complex. As journalists, we're like, we don't really need a more complex model. We need a more approachable illustration of this thing. And then you find the balance between the two things.
we want people to understand what the model is saying. The anti-intellectualist tilt that we're seeing, the attacks against scientists and researchers, I think it's really showing that being able to be understood by the public and relate to them on a more storyteller, more emotional and localized and specific level is really important and maybe has been neglected. I think that also is a really promising aspect of that kind of collaboration in scientists and science.
Yeah, I think we both want the same thing in a lot of ways. Like, one, we want to do really rigorous, accurate, fair work, but we're also, I think both of us, academics and journalists, have a deep and well-founded fear that even if we do really accurate, rigorous work, it might not be relevant, trying to be sure that the research questions that a team is asking in a research and academic context are very relevant to the public. The teams we worked with felt as urgent as journalists saying, we need to make sure our work is relevant to the public. Like, we can't spend a year on a giant investigation that no one cares about and doesn't change anything in the real world because the question really wasn't that relevant to a community that you want to serve with that sort of time that you have to do that research.
Definitely. Even if it is relevant, how do you make people care is huge. How do you cut through the disinformation and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Some of those problems we're not very close to solving. Just the progress and possible solutions coming out of that kind of collaboration from this COVID project is really cool. But yeah, I do want to talk about the data liberation project as well. So I know it was originally an independent project that was kind of adopted by Muckrock in 2024. Is that when you took over as director?
Yeah, exactly. So before it was ran by Jeremy Singer Vine, and I can only tell my recounting of his origin story that I was sitting eating a donut and drinking coffee, talking to him about the origin story of DLP. But in my understanding, he had started the Data Liberation Project after going on a hike. And while he was on the hike, he realized that a lot of what he does as an investigative and data journalist in collecting data that is a public good happens at the end of a long investigation, usually, or at least
Mm,
in the newsrooms he was in, where after 1 year or 2 years or whatever, how long this investigation took, you make the data public. If you do, a lot of newsrooms don't, but he was thinking like, well, we wait till the very end, but also, as soon as I get that data, it's already useful to the public and it's supposed to be for the public because we're trying to avoid being scooped as journalists. We wait until the actual investigation is published to publish the data. And his moment on the hike, as I remember it, was realizing he wanted to start a project that made data public just because it's a public good and not because he was reporting on a story and publishing it after.
So enabling more journalism rather than gatekeeping your sources.
Yeah, more journalism, or maybe for advocates, for attorneys, for civic groups, for just interested people, that data could be really useful to them sooner rather than later. I think both for journalists and all these other groups, making the data public first could be more impactful than waiting longer if that data is really useful in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. When you took over, that was the end of 2024, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it was mostly FOIA requests was the main way of the data being liberated. And also some web scraping was going on.
Yeah.
Did that process change when you started taking over and after Trump's second term started? How has that process changed? Are FOIAs harder to get answered these days? Or what does that look like for you guys now?
I mean, our FOIA is harder to get. Is it harder or taking longer? Generally, yes, from everything I've heard and also experienced myself. That is not so much what changed our approach, but rather Jeremy's idea of data could just be made public because it's a public good, and we can use these skills that we have as data journalists or investigative journalists to find, identify, clean, and publish data that is a public use, is a public good. This creates a very open and transparent process that would be really useful for volunteers to be involved in. I think there were already volunteers helping Jeremy, but he was doing it on a one-to-one basis. Someone has an idea for a request, they collaborate on a request, they send off the request. We wanted at Muckrock to orient it more towards being a volunteer-driven project and focused not just on getting the requests off and making the data public, but building it as something really participatory. So that's been kind of the refocusing of one of the main goals of DLP, which is to do all these things, but to do it while also encouraging anyone, whether you have data skills or public record skills or not, whether you're a data journalist or not, to participate in finding and making public data sets that the public should know about.
Okay. Help me understand the difference in approaches. You say volunteer driven, but is it more like instead of specific individuals requesting, I want this data set, it's more like you're all working together to identify data sets, or how is that?
One thing I've tried to get going is more like we have a meeting and people throw out ideas of requests that they think are useful. I think what's still really helpful about the way that Jeremy had done it and it's still happening is organizations will reach out to DLP and be like, we could use your help with this, or we saw you requested this. Would you request that again? And that's super helpful. But I would love it to be a process in the future where lots of volunteers have ideas of different data that should be made public, and DLP is a place to find the resources, the community, the camaraderie, the help in cleaning the data to be able to do that. So that it's not just me deciding what gets requested or someone at Muckrock,
Mm.
but a group of volunteers where like there's a process of, like, oh, hey, this is interesting. And this is kind of what we have right now, where it's like if something is interesting, we have a research document. I'll share out the research document with a volunteer who posts in the Slack and is like, hey, I'm kind of interested in requesting this. I'd be like, hey, can you fill out this and then let's talk about it in our next meeting, or I'll talk about it one-on-one with you to make sure we have the request scoped out and really know what we're asking for and it's going to be worth the time to request this thing.
So you're kind of like training a team that can then help those individual requesters on their own.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Training a group of people who can, mostly through the Slack channel right now, collaborate on those requests, sharpening the requests, filing the request, and cleaning the data to make it public.
That's really cool. I didn't know it was the community effort. I've come across you guys in my research, and the coverage makes it seem more like the Harvard database, like an institutional thing that you don't really interact with, but you can take the data. So that's really interesting because that's what we're trying to do with the Prairie Fire Project, where it's not just covering it, but trying to connect researchers with each other and connect them with tools. So trying to connect them with this data liberation community would be really great.
I had a conversation with an academic researcher a few months ago. I was asking her about this data set, and she was like, so are you guys interested in filing any other FOIA requests? Because I have some ideas, but I just don't have the time to go through the whole FOIA process. And I was like, yes, we have volunteers who will help with that. They want to spend the time filing this request. If you have a great idea for data that you think that the federal government has or local governments has, and you're burdened by publishing papers, grading students' work, doing all the things that you do in an academic context and don't want to fiddle around with FOIA and cleaning data. That's what we want to do. That's what this group is for. And so, yeah, I think the idea is not so much like an institution that you just interact with one way, but that it is really a volunteer effort, a community. Sometimes I love third spaces and I think a lot
Mm.
about third spaces. And I do want DLP to be a third space for people that they can feel connected to other people who have the same ideas in terms of open source philosophy and culture and civic data and those sorts of things. I think the goal was to get it to that place. And there are some really good models like Bellingcat, for example. I'm on their Discord and they have volunteers who contribute OSINT research to investigations and get bylines and are people across the world who are excited about this and feel a lot of meaning in that. We want to be able to find those sorts of people for the public records world and give them tools and community and the things to make that not disillusioning and lonely and not fun. We want to make that
Right.
process fun and useful for the people that want to do that.
That's such a huge problem is the disillusionment and the isolation, I think. Collaboration and community is the solution to so many of the problems that we're facing, not only investigating, but also it's easier to control you when you're an individual and it's easier to feel hopeless. So community building, third space building is a foundational level thing to the research and to the work, which maybe people haven't really thought of it that way before.
Yeah, exactly. You're speaking to the whole thing that we talk about so often at Muck Rock and that I think is on my mind all the time nowadays. I think now more than ever, that sort of isolation and the need to feel that your work is connected to real things out in the world and that it's not a sinkhole on an internet of AI slop, but that it is
Yeah.
like it's a real thing. It's doing real things for real people. And the internet can still be a place where that can happen.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that still when every space that used to be cool, like every social media site is now just, brands tweeting each other and then AI slop.
Yeah, exactly.
So where can people get involved and submit their requests?
Right now, the main space for volunteers wanting to get plugged in is Slack. If you go to muckrock.com/Slack, you join the public data liberation channel, you'll see me talking with other volunteers there, and you can just say hi, and I'll just jump in and start talking to you. I think that's the easiest way for now. We don't have so many active volunteers on any given day that it's like, I can't answer a message from someone who's like, how to get involved. So I would just answer anyone directly. And if you get in that Slack, you'll see I post every week, like, here's the different ongoing volunteer efforts. Here's where we are. Here's where we could use help. Someone could plug in through there.
Okay, sweet. I definitely want to feature that. I think that the Prairie Fire audience would be really interested in something like that. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, we were talking about FOIAs a little bit. So you said you're kind of leaning away from FOIAs. Your last liberated data set was in fall of 2025, and the last request you have up on the site was April 2025. Do you have any active requests going on right now, or are you more leaning on web scraping, or what's going on?
So when we inherited the project, Jeremy had a lot of requests going. The first year of keeping the project alive and figuring out the direction we wanted to go, we were getting requests every couple months back from all these requests that Jeremy had filed. I think the first year was really just trying to keep up with those. And when we got the data back, get it cleaned and get it published and on the site because we don't want to wait too long to publish data. So we went through that process. I think we had filed requests at the state level in a few different cases and haven't gotten those on the site yet because we're still getting different states back. We'll still be filing FOIA requests at the federal level as well. I think doing a lot more of this, like state by state on different topics, is something that we're trying to do while still getting more and more requests back from all those requests that in the first 3 years or a couple years, Jeremy and others have been filing. We're keeping up with filing more requests at a state level. There are more requests I would like to file, especially in the area of environmental data in the federal government. Having the capacity, having more volunteers who are interested in that would help us be able to do that. But that's been on my to-do list for a while. One of the bigger focuses right now is patient safety. We've been gearing up in the last few months to file different styles of requests to different states across the country for data sets related to patient safety. Start digging into some stuff there.
Okay, interesting. Why the switch to states? Is it like a little bit easier to deal with them or yeah.
Yeah, especially right now. I think it helps not put all of our eggs in one basket in terms of like if you have a really good, well thought out FOIA request at the federal level to a federal agency, that could take a long time, especially now. I think at the state level, public records laws and compliance is playing out differently than at the federal level. So it's a little bit easier to get those requests back. Instead of just filing one request, we can have an idea for a request and then file it to 50 different states. And then maybe 20 of those come back and we are able to get that data. That's 20 data sets that we can publish rather than just one. So we still want to do the federal stuff, but I think also the local part is something that Muckrock has been doing for a longer time because lots of our requesters on our website are interested in things that are just local to them. So I think it's more the way that I think about public records and am interested in, and also helps us produce things that are useful to local reporters.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. There's in the coverage of the research apparatus being dismantled and data sets being deleted, there's just a lot of panic. I mean, with good reason that these resources are gone. But I think people don't realize that, the state government also collects similar data. Your local city will sometimes collect that data. It's weird to me. It really bugs me, a lot of the coverage on this stuff because it's so negative. I don't think people want to be reminded of the negativity without like, and here's where you can go to solve the problem. Your local government, your state governments also are resources. So what else was I know Jeremy Singer-Vine in one of the founding Data Liberation Project documents was talking about trying to craft FOIAs that are as persuasive as possible and addressing typical pushback that you would get. Can you talk about what kind of typical pushback that would be and how do you make it persuasive and has that changed at all since Trump started again?
Yeah, I think making it as persuasive as possible usually means knowing as much as you can about what you're asking for beforehand and being able to say the best that you can where exactly that data is located. I think of it often like physically, even though the data is not in a hard drive in a filing cabinet. Like if I could think of whose filing cabinet is this in, like who's in charge of this data, where is it located? Can we find if we search the agency's name and then like file type PDF or something or file type PowerPoint in Google, can we find training materials where the government agency is describing the data set themselves? So we can use that to describe to the FOIA officer what we're requesting. Most of the time, it really just means doing the research that we need to do to know how to describe the data, while also still asking for a data dictionary and the things that'll help us know more about the data when we get it. The pushbacks are usually around not being clear enough about what the data set really is, where this big thing lives. If it's a big relational database, what are the different parts of it and what parts are we requesting? Trying to make that the least burdensome on the FOIA officer as possible. I think the pushback is usually that it wasn't described correctly or that this thing isn't stored in the way that we described or that what we're requesting is overly burdensome because of X, Y, or Z reason.
You would think that in an ideal situation, the FOIA officers would be able to parse a non-expert's request, as it's supposed to be public data that serves the layman as well as the expert. I think staff shortages have probably made that kind of impossible. So that makes sense as a strategy. What kind of web scraping are you guys doing?
Most of the web scraping happened prior to Muckrock taking over, and there are a few that are still running on actions. I think four of them in total. One is related to firearm background checks. I can't remember offhand what the other three are. They're kind of just running right now. The scraping is not running into a lot of problems with the website changing. So we haven't actually had to update those much because I haven't worked with volunteers on those, and the volunteers that were working on those are prior to me. I can't actually think a lot about them. I just know that they're happening, and I think some people are using them still or using the data that are produced. I haven't been involved in those as much.
There's
Just chugging away in the background. We want to do more scraping with volunteers, but at this point, it'd be up to a volunteer to bring that idea forward and be like, I think we should scrape this or do that. On the other hand, the internet is always changing. I think going after public records requests that are a single stagnant data set is a better use of our time. Not to say that scraping is important, it definitely is and will always have a place, but I think they're just become projects that are present a lot of different challenges, especially for volunteers doing this on their nights and weekends outside of their regular job.
yeah, you don't want to point them to a website that's not there anymore.
Or it could be 6 months and they restructure the whole website and then the scraper falls apart, or the parsing part falls apart.
So I know you guys got the EPA risk management program data, which was taken down in January 2025. I can't remember if you guys have done any of the other big data sets that have been taken down or restricted. Are you working on those or what's going on with that?
No, I think that's really the biggest one that we've been able to contribute to. And that's something that predates me, but one that I know is really important and I've heard from lots of people about. I was at a journalism conference and met someone from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and she was like, "Oh, I've been wanting you to talk to you about this data set that you have up on the website that's super useful to us. This has been the one way we've been able to access it as different things have changed." I'd say that's kind of the most important one.
That was huge. I did a piece about the recent chemical explosions on the West Coast. The risk management program data is super tied into that. And it's insane. Something that was crazy to me was that the things that almost exploded or did explode in Washington weren't a part of the database because they weren't considered dangerous enough. The fact that that data set went down, that so many chemical lobbyists' requests have been followed through by the administration is a huge and dangerous story. So the fact that they have this data set because of your guys' work is really huge. Every alternative source that I found was the Coalition to Prevent Chemical Disasters, part of the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Environmental Defense Fund, Drexel University. They were all using the data that you guys liberated and they all cited you, which was really cool.
That's awesome. And that's part of the ethos of DLP is like, I don't know if Jeremy or the volunteer that worked on it could have imagined where we are in 2026 and how useful this data would be in a different way than when they were just trying to get the data into a shape that people would be able to explore several years ago.
Yeah, that must be really exciting. Like what you were saying, how about so much of work can just be like shouting into the black void of the internet, but these things really do make a difference to research and to advocates. It's really important, and I'm glad you guys are doing it.
Thanks.
But okay, there's other data sets that, do you guys work with the Data Rescue Project at all?
I know of them, and a few of those folks are in the DLP Slack channel, and I've joined different chats or communications channels for the work that they're doing or have attended webinars. There's some overlap in communication, but we don't have a formal collaboration. When a question about data rescue comes up, I'm like, let's ask the experts, find a way to get to them about a question, or just tag one of the directors. Linda Kellum is in our Slack, and if something comes up like that, I'll just at Linda and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And then she'll reply. They know about us and we know about them.
I was wondering how much crossover there was between your guys' volunteers, because it seems like there would be.
Definitely. I don't think it's something that we fully tapped into as much as we could, or maybe we're prepared to. I think they've done an awesome job of moving as quick as they could on things. For DLP, we already had some ideas of what types of requests we wanted to file, what we were working on, trying to get this out of the door. And then 2025 started, and all of a sudden we were in a completely different place. We couldn't have known, but maybe didn't move as quickly to join in those efforts in ways that I think are still necessary. And we could have redirected our volunteers into some of their stuff as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to coordinate. Everything happened like all these data sets went down so fast, especially like the CDC ones. Kind of merging these efforts and getting more cohesion across like the data rescue space is really important. That's kind of one of my goals with this. I'm trying to think of other forums. Do you know of Safeguarding Research and Culture?
No.
Okay, they're really cool. They are data rescue. I think they're based in Germany, but they've done a lot of US stuff because we're the worst.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they have a forum where they're sharing tools. They're a bunch of volunteers, and they have their archive of everything they've rescued, I think is called PsyOp. And yeah, they have this hacktivist like torrenting thing going on, which is really cool. And that's how they're saving the data is through torrenting. So it's like all of these different locations that it's saved. So I think if you're looking for volunteers, they are a good place to try. Do you know the Forum of Federal Data Users or the Federal Data Forum?
We need to get in front of these people and be like, here's what we could do. If you want to join the project, we can help do these sort of things. Here's the resources and skills we have, and how can we collaborate?
I think they would all be excited to hear that. I see that all the time on the Federal Data Forum of people being like, hey, I built this data tool, or like, does anybody know how to use this? The Association for Public Data Users posts there all the time. I think people would be really happy to hear that you guys are looking for collaborators.
I'm looking for a pen, but I don't have one. But maybe afterwards, maybe you could email me some of these names so I don't forget.
Absolutely.
That would be super helpful.
Yeah, I am going to be joining the Slack that you guys have. That's
Cool.
perfect.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, where did my questions go? Okay, so when you guys uncover an interesting data set, a foundational one, do you have channels that you use to point reporters to it? How do you get the word out?
Yeah, that's something we're still trying to figure out. And the way I think there are a couple ways of doing it depending on how useful the data is and how accessible it already is. I think there's varying degrees of data releases as we're kind of thinking about them. One could be we get it up on the Data Liberation Project site with documentation. Everything we do has a pretty hefty amount of documentation. So some volunteers contribute to documenting what we know about the data, what looks fishy, what looks solid, what sort of variables are included, are there redactions, that kind of stuff. And that's most basic, just get it on the website. And then the other way would be also publishing on Muckrock at the same time and being like, hey, we published this data on the DLP site. This is a project. The Deliberation Project is a project of Muckrock. Here's different ways you can use it. And maybe I and some experts or some volunteers speak with experts who are experts in the subject matter field of the data, and we have a guide of exploring it as well. And then the very last part is maybe that plus a tool like the Risk Management Explorer, where you can do something you couldn't do with this data before with the tool that we've made for it as well. I think figuring out what level of work we want to put into making the data accessible in some way, and then publishing it and getting it out in the Muckrock newsletter and to our Slack and to collaborators the best that we can.
Yeah, that's cool. I like the tool part of it. It's always cool when people can create something new and usable for others, and it just makes the data so much more accessible, especially because I'm coming at this, I don't have any data science experience. So when people are like, here's the data set, I go, great. But when people are like, and here's my tool, that's perfect for me. That's the level that I'm comfortable with.
But it requires a lot of time, and then maybe you make something that's not actually super useful to people or is not used. So I think the question is always what is going to be useful and what is going to be used by the most amount of people.
A delicate balance. Okay. What was my last question that I just had?
Maybe it'll come back around.
I think that was most of what I wanted to cover. I will get back to you about the different forums and volunteer projects that I've been tracking. I do a section in the Prairie Fire newsletter that's kind of a community bulletin, like, hey, help me out section. Maybe if you wanted to draft something from Data Liberation Project that's like, hey, help us with this project, or here's how to sign up to be a volunteer. That would be perfect. We would love to
Yeah,
shout.
awesome. Let me make a note of that. When should I get you that? When would it fit in the newsletter?
What day is it today? It's the 24th. I don't have a newsletter ready to go right now. We're still trying to get our publishing schedule regulated, so
Yeah.
you probably have a couple weeks. I can give you more information as soon as I have it.
No rush at all. If this is going out in the next couple of days, I can write it up real quick. But yeah, if you could just let me know whenever you're ready, that's awesome.
Okay, definitely. Sweet. Okay, is there any questions you have for me? Anything I missed? Especially.
Nothing that you miss. I guess one thing I would love to highlight as well in terms of DLP is one of the cool projects I'm really excited about is the Marshall Project had been requesting banned books lists from prison systems,
Mm.
state prison systems across the country. And in the last year or so, we were talking with the Marshall Project, trying to figure out a way to collaborate because we've been friends as organizations for a while and we're trying to figure out ways we could keep working together. They're like, yeah, one thing we could really use help with is refreshing the data for banned books across the country. We were like, that's great because this is a great style of project for DOP volunteers because this is something very practical and immediately understandably important to volunteers, even if they're not familiar with the criminal justice system. In the last few months and then going into the fall, one of the things that volunteers are going to be working on is helping take what they did a few years ago, the database that they made, and then in the last months I filed some more requests and now I'm working with volunteers and we're cleaning those data sets up to refresh the data again in the fall, leading up in October to Banned Books Month, and Prison Banned Books Week is in sometime in October as well. Just to highlight another cool collaboration, I filed the request and now volunteers are picking different states and we have a GitHub where each state is an issue and people are tackling each state. Hopefully, it'll lead to the Marshall Project being able to get new data out to reporters in those states and reporters who can then, if you're in Texas or California or any of the other states that we've been able to get this data, you now have a more recent list of books that have been banned in prisons and could go talk to people in the prison system about this or talk with authors whose books have been censored and that kind of thing.
Right. Like what you were saying with the COVID project, it's the groundwork for then the storytellers and the local investigators to pick up.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. I love the Marshall Project. They're doing really cool stuff. So that's awesome. I'll be looking out for that. So is that like, so you guys will put out something for that and then Marshall, I'm assuming will also, will they host the data or point to you?
We actually haven't figured out the logistics of that yet, but I think they'll still host the data, maybe not in the same way they were before. We're still trying to figure out how we take these clean lists of data or lists of books and highlight the ones that are kind of the most important books for people to know that have been censored, because there's often big lists of different types of books.
So they'll probably be the primary hosters.
And then also, hopefully, they have this project called Investigate This, which the idea is just to get data sets to reporters and guides to reporters on how to use that data. So this will kind of then work its way back into an Investigate This guide.
Okay, I love the Investigate This series. I highlight those on the Prairie Fire stuff as well because they're really cool. I remember the question I was going to ask from earlier, which was, has Muckrock ever done an investigation based on the Data Liberation Project data?
Let me think. No, not yet. Not built a whole investigation around the data. We've seen other newsrooms use the data being cited in different places, but the goal would eventually be that that's possible as well. On our editorial team, we also now have a research desk that helps local newsrooms if we're doing state by state requests. Hopefully, those requests and that data that volunteers help liberate, then the newsrooms involved in the research desk, we can get that to them and be like, hey, we cleaned up this data about adverse events, health events in hospitals in your state, in Colorado. We know how the data works. If you want us to do a training on it, we can do a training for you as well. So the goal is that it all feeds back to our work and to other collaborations as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so a lot of this you already have a journalistic outlet, a on the ground outlet in mind.
I think we have enough Sunlight Research Desk members that we have newsrooms we can reach out to directly.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's rad. Awesome. I think I got through
Cool.
everything and I know you have to go, but thank you so much for your time. That was perfect for what I was looking for.
Awesome.
Yay.
It's been a great conversation. I'm really glad that we got to meet and chat, and I'll see you in the DLP Slack, and we'll keep in touch in general. I'm really
Hell yeah.
excited to meet another collaborator and like-minded colleague. This is great.
Me too. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. See ya.